The first crack of the jackhammer shattered the morning silence of Maple Lane, and with it, 15 years of neighborhood peace. Michael Reynolds stood in his backyard, arms crossed over his chest, watching as the demolition crew attacked his once prized swimming pool with mechanical efficiency. Each strike of metal against concrete felt both destructive and liberating. The pool, a kidney-shaped turquoise-tiled monument to suburban success, had been his ex-wife Audrey's dream, not his. Now, 3 years after their divorce, he was finally reclaiming his space. "You sure about this, Mr. Reynolds?" The foreman shouted over the industrial cacophony. "Once we break through the shell, there's no going back." Michael nodded firmly. He had made his decision months ago after calculating the pool's annual maintenance costs against its actual use, approximately 12 swims per year, usually during obligatory summer barbecues he hosted for colleagues he barely tolerated. The economics didn't make sense, and neither did the chlorine-scented reminder of his failed marriage. "I'm turning it into a vegetable garden," Michael explained, though the foreman hadn't asked. "Tomatoes, zucchini, maybe some herbs." He had spent hours watching YouTube videos about raised beds and companion planting. His new girlfriend, Layla, had inspired him with her sustainable living philosophy. "It's better for the environment, too." The foreman shrugged, clearly uninterested in Michael's gardening aspirations, and returned to directing his crew. Michael pulled out his phone and snapped a few progress photos to send to Layla, who was presenting at a conference in Portland and wouldn't be back until the weekend. He was hoping to surprise her with at least the demolition phase completed. That's when he felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. Michael turned toward the property line and locked eyes with Patricia Winters, better known throughout the neighborhood as Perfect Patty. She stood ramrod straight in her pristine garden, manicured hand clutching the collar of her polo shirt, her face a mask of undisguised horror. Patricia had moved into the house next door 7 years ago, following a messy divorce of her own. Since then, she had appointed herself as the unofficial guardian of Maple Lane's property values and aesthetic standards. Her lawn was eternally emerald, her roses perpetually blooming, and her criticism of others' landscaping choices reliably cutting. "Good morning, Patricia," Michael called out with forced cheerfulness, raising his hand in a neighborly wave. She didn't wave back. Instead, her thin lips pressed together so tightly they nearly disappeared. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Her voice carried easily over the fence, crisp with accusation. "Just making some changes," Michael responded, keeping his tone light. The pool was becoming more trouble than it's worth. Patricia's eyes widened. "Changes? You're destroying a perfectly good swimming pool." She gestured dramatically with one hand. "Do you have any idea what this will do to property values on this street?" Michael had prepared for resistance, had even rehearsed responses to potential criticisms, but the intensity of Patricia's reaction still caught him off guard. "I checked with the HOA," he reassured her. "There's nothing in the bylaws about pool removal. I have all the necessary permits." "Permits?" Patricia scoffed, as if the very concept was beneath her. "This isn't about permits, Michael. This is about consideration for your neighbors, about maintaining the character of our community." She emphasized the word "our" as if her stake in his backyard was equal to his own. The jackhammer paused momentarily, leaving an uncomfortable silence between them. "I appreciate your concern," Michael said evenly, "but I've made my decision." Patricia's right eye twitched slightly. "We'll see about that," she whispered, just loudly enough for him to hear, before turning on her heel and marching back into her house. Michael watched her go, a faint uneasiness settling in his stomach. He turned back to the demolition, trying to recapture his earlier enthusiasm, but Patricia's words hung in the air like the fine concrete dust now settling over his yard. Little did he know, this was just the beginning. By mid-afternoon, the demolition crew had made significant progress. The once pristine swimming pool now resembled an archaeological dig site. Chunks of concrete piled high, rebar exposed like the skeletal remains of some long-extinct creature. Michael found himself oddly captivated by the destruction, watching from his kitchen window as he prepared a late lunch. The doorbell rang just as he was cutting his sandwich in half. Michael wiped his hands on a dish towel and made his way to the front door, mentally preparing for another confrontation with Patricia. Instead, he found himself face to face with 3 other neighbors: Bob Harrington from across the street, Diane Miller from 2 doors down, and Tom Schultz, the current president of the Maple Lane Homeowners Association. "Michael," Tom began, his voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone accustomed to mediating neighborhood disputes. "We were hoping we could have a quick word about the renovations you're undertaking." Michael stepped aside, inviting them in with a sweep of his arm. "Of course. Would anyone like some iced tea?" The neighbors exchanged uncomfortable glances as they filed into his living room. No one accepted the offer of refreshments. "Patricia called an emergency neighborhood meeting this morning," Diane explained, settling primly on the edge of Michael's sofa. Her fingers nervously adjusted the silk scarf around her neck. "She's quite concerned about your project." "So I gathered," Michael replied dryly. But as I told her, I checked the Iowa bylaws. There's nothing prohibiting pool removal. Tom cleared his throat. Technically, that's correct. The bylaws don't explicitly forbid removing a pool. He paused, then added, but Patricia has raised some valid concerns about property values. The homes on Maple Lane have traditionally been marketed as luxury properties with high-end amenities. Like swimming pools, Bob interjected, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. When we bought our place, the realtor emphasized how rare it was to find a neighborhood where nearly every home had a private pool. Michael felt a flicker of irritation. I understand that, but I'm not obligated to maintain a feature of my home that I no longer want or use. And frankly, a well-designed garden can be just as appealing to potential buyers. Diane made a small, skeptical noise. Perhaps to a certain type of buyer, she said. But the demographic that typically purchases in this neighborhood. What Diane means, Tom interrupted smoothly, is that consistency in amenities helps maintain our collective property values. We're not saying you can't remove your pool, Michael. We're just hoping you might reconsider. The doorbell rang again, this time with an insistent, repeated pressing that made all four of them turn toward the entryway. That'll be Patricia, Bob muttered under his breath. Michael excused himself and opened the door to find not only Patricia but also a uniformed city official standing on his porch. The man wore a chalky shirt with a City of Oak Ridge logo and carried a clipboard. "Mr. Reynolds?" the official asked. "I'm Craig Dawson from the City Planning Department. I understand you're conducting a pool removal on the premises." Michael nodded slowly, aware of Patricia's smug expression hovering just behind the city worker's shoulder. "That's right. I have all the necessary permits." He gestured toward the kitchen counter, where the paperwork was neatly stacked. "Yes, well, there's been a complaint filed about potential violations of the city's water protection ordinance," Dawson explained, consulting his clipboard. "I'll need to inspect the worksite and your drainage plans." Patricia stepped forward, arms crossed. "I've been researching, Michael. Did you know that improper pool demolition can lead to sinkholes? Or that the chemicals from pool water can contaminate groundwater if not properly disposed of?" Her voice rose with each question. "Not to mention the noise pollution and disruption to the peaceful enjoyment of our homes." The three neighbors who had been sitting in Michael's living room had now crowded into the entryway, watching the confrontation with varying degrees of discomfort and curiosity. "I've hired a reputable company that follows all environmental guidelines," Michael responded, fighting to keep his voice level. "You're welcome to speak with the foreman about their protocols." "Oh, I already have," Patricia retorted, "and I've taken photographs of what appears to be improper disposal of concrete debris. The city has very specific regulations about construction waste." The city inspector shifted uncomfortably. "If I could just take a look at the site, Mr. Reynolds." Michael led the growing entourage through his house and onto the back patio. The demolition crew had paused for a lunch break, leaving the half-destroyed pool unattended. Several of the workers looked up in surprise at the procession of neighbors and officials. As the inspector made his way around the perimeter of the excavation, Patricia launched into a detailed critique of everything from the placement of the debris container to the lack of protective covering over Michael's neighbor's rose bushes on the other side. "And furthermore," she continued, pulling out her phone to display a series of close-up photographs, "I believe these cracks in the ground indicate potential structural issues that could affect the foundations of adjacent properties." The inspector leaned in to examine her phone screen, his expression increasingly concerned. Michael felt the control of his own property slipping away with each accusation. What had started as a simple home improvement project was rapidly escalating into a neighborhood crisis, with Patricia Winters appointing herself as both prosecutor and judge. And judging by the grim determination on her face as she continued to scroll through her photographic evidence, she was just getting started. That evening, Michael sat alone on his back patio, nursing a beer and surveying the wreckage of both his pool and his day. The inspector had found no actual violations, but had nevertheless issued a 24-hour work stoppage to review the project plans in greater detail. The demolition crew had packed up their equipment with obvious annoyance, the foreman warning Michael that delays would incur additional costs. As twilight settled over the neighborhood, Michael's phone buzzed with a text from Lila. "How's Operation Pool Be Gone going? Send pics." He sighed, uncertain how to explain the bureaucratic quagmire he now found himself in. Rather than responding immediately, he scrolled through his contacts and called his college friend Alex, who had conveniently become an environmental lawyer. "Let me get this straight," Alex said after Michael had explained the situation. "Your neighbor is essentially harassing you about a completely legal home improvement project on your own property?" "That about sums it up," Michael confirmed. "She's rallied half the neighborhood against me and somehow convinced the city to temporarily halt the work." "Based on what you've told me, she doesn't have a legal leg to stand on," Alex assured him. "The city can't permanently stop you from removing a private recreational feature from your own property without a compelling public interest reason, which doesn't exist here. So what do I do?" "Document everything. Every interaction, every accusation. If she's trespassing, to take photos, document that too. And make sure your contractor documents their compliance with all regulations. Alex paused. Has she made any threats or engaged in any overtly harassing behavior? Nothing I could prove, Michael replied. It's more like constant pressure. Always watching, always finding something new to complain about. Classic passive-aggressive tactics, Alex observed. Look, finish your beer, get some sleep, and call me tomorrow after you hear back from the inspector. This will blow over once they confirm you're following all the proper procedures. Michael thanked his friend and hung up, feeling marginally better. He finally texted Layla a sanitized version of events, downplaying the neighborhood drama and promising updates the next day. Just as he was about to head inside, the motion-activated security light on Patricia's house flashed on, illuminating her figure standing at the edge of her property, phone in hand, apparently taking more pictures of his backyard in the dim evening light. Evening, Patricia, Michael called out, unable to keep a hint of sarcasm from his voice. Enjoying the view? I'm documenting the standing water in that pit you've created, she replied crisply. West Nile virus is a serious concern in this county, not to mention the risk to neighborhood children who might wander in. Michael glanced at the demolition site. There was indeed a small puddle at the deepest part of the excavation where the main drain had been, probably no more than an inch deep, the result of a brief rain shower earlier in the afternoon. The crew will be back as soon as the city gives the all clear, he said. And my yard is fenced, so unless neighborhood children are routinely jumping fences, I think they'll be fine. Patricia lowered her phone, her expression suddenly softer, almost sympathetic. You know, Michael, there are other ways to move on after a divorce than destroying valuable property features. The unexpected personal attack landed like a physical blow. Michael stared at her, momentarily speechless. I'm not removing the pool because of my divorce, he finally managed. Of course not, Patricia said, her tone dripping with false understanding. Just like I didn't replant my entire garden after Richard left. Sometimes we need physical changes to process emotional transitions. I understand that. But what I did didn't affect my neighbor's property values. Before Michael could respond, his phone rang. He glanced down to see Layla's name on the screen. I need to take this, he said, turning away from Patricia. Of course, she replied. We'll continue this discussion tomorrow. The HOA is holding an emergency meeting at 7. I've taken the liberty of adding a potential amendment to the bylaws regarding major landscape alterations to the agenda. You might want to attend. Michael gritted his teeth as he answered Layla's call. Watching Patricia retreat into her house, her security light clicking off and plunging the property line back into darkness. Hey, how's your conference? He asked, forcing cheer into his voice. Forget the conference, Layla replied. What's this about neighborhood drama? Your text was suspiciously light on details. Michael sank back into his patio chair and gave Layla the unfiltered version of the day's events, including Patricia's latest insinuations and threats. She's proposing a retroactive bylaw amendment? Layla sounded incredulous. Can they even do that? I don't know, Michael admitted. But I'm starting to think this goes beyond the pool. There's something personal in the way she's coming after me. You've never had problems with her before? Nothing major. The usual neighbor stuff, complaints about where I put my trash cans, passive-aggressive notes about my lawn needing mowing. He paused, thinking. Though now that I think about it, things did ramp up after you started staying over regularly. There was a moment of silence on the line. Michael, Layla said slowly, I think your neighbor might be interested in you. What? No, Fats. He broke off, suddenly reviewing the past year of interactions with Patricia through a new lens. The occasional invitations to neighborhood events that always seemed to come when he was alone, the offers to collect his mail when he traveled, the subtle criticisms that began around the time Layla entered the picture. Oh, just a theory, Layla said, but it would explain the extreme reaction to a change she'd have no real stake in. Michael stared at Patricia's darkened house where a single light now burned in what he knew to be her home office. Was she in there right now drafting bylaw amendments specifically targeted at him? Or was she, as Layla suggested, motivated by something more personal in property values? Either way, the pool demolition had clearly breached a dam of simmering neighborhood tensions, and tomorrow's HOA meeting promised to be the flood. The Maple Lane Homeowners Association meetings were typically held in the community clubhouse, a modest building adjacent to the neighborhood playground that usually hosted book clubs, yoga classes, and the occasional birthday party. Michael had attended exactly 2 meetings in his 10 years as a resident, once when he moved in and once when the board proposed a special assessment for repaving the community tennis courts. Tonight, however, the small meeting room was packed to capacity. Michael arrived 15 minutes early and still found himself relegated to standing room at the back, leaning against the wall next to a water cooler that made an ominous gurgling sound every few minutes. Tom Schultz, the HOA president, called the meeting to order at precisely 7 o'clock. I want to thank everyone for coming on such short notice. He began, adjusting his reading glasses. As you know, we have one item on tonight's agenda, a proposed amendment to the community bylaws regarding major landscape alterations. Patricia sat in the front row, a thick binder open on her lap, her posture perfect. She had exchanged her casual gardening clothes for a tailored blazer and pearls, as if dressing for a corporate board meeting rather than a neighborhood discussion. Before we get to the proposed amendment, Tom continued, I believe Patricia has prepared a brief presentation on property value preservation. Michael stifled a groan as Patricia stood and made her way to the small podium. She connected her laptop to a projector, and moments later, a PowerPoint slide appeared on the wall with the title Maintaining Excellence, the Economic Impact of Cohesive Neighborhood Amenities. As many of you know, Patricia began, her voice carrying clearly through the room. I worked in real estate development for 27 years before my retirement. During that time, I specialized in luxury community planning and valuation. She clicked to the next slide, which displayed a graph showing property values over time. This chart represents the average sale prices in 3 comparable neighborhoods over the past decade. Michael's attention drifted as Patricia launched into a detailed analysis of market trends, comparable sales, and amenity premiums. He was startled back to focus when his own house suddenly appeared on the screen, a before and after comparison. The before showed his backyard with a pool sparkling in summer sunshine. The after was a harsh close-up of the current demolition site, looking as unappealing as possible with muddy water and broken concrete. Based on comparable market analysis, Patricia was saying the removal of a premium amenity like an in-ground pool can reduce property values by 15 to 20%. Not just for the subject property, but for adjacent homes as well. She paused dramatically. That means that Mr. Reynolds' decision could potentially cost this community hundreds of thousands of dollars in collective property value. A murmur ran through the audience. Michael felt dozens of eyes turned toward him. That's simply not accurate, he called out, unable to remain silent any longer. Property values are determined by numerous factors, and a well-designed landscape can actually. Mr. Reynolds will have his chance to speak later, Tom interrupted, gesturing for Patricia to continue. She smiled thinly in Michael's direction before clicking to her next slide. I've taken the liberty of drafting a proposed amendment to our community bylaws, she announced. It would require homeowner approval for any significant removal or alteration of premium amenities, including pools, outdoor kitchens, and landscape water features. Michael's phone buzzed in his pocket. He discreetly checked it to find a text from Alex, his lawyer friend. Just got your email with the proposed amendment. Do not agree to anything. They can't apply this retroactively to work that's already permitted. As Patricia concluded her presentation to enthusiastic applause from several neighbors, Michael felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to find an unexpected ally, Martina Gonzalez, a retired civil engineer who lived at the end of the cul-de-sac. This is ridiculous, she whispered. I've seen the garden plans you showed at the block party last month. It's beautiful, sustainable, and completely your right to install. Thanks, Michael whispered back, grateful for the support. Tom was now calling for discussion on the proposed amendment. Several neighbors rose to express concern about declining standards and community aesthetic cohesion. Michael noted that most were older residents who had been in the neighborhood since its development in the early 2000s. When it was finally his turn to speak, Michael approached the podium with his phone in hand, displaying the detailed renderings of his planned garden that Layla had helped him create. I understand the concerns about property values, he began, his voice steadier than he felt. But what I'm creating isn't a detriment to our community, it's an enhancement. This will be a professionally designed, drought-resistant garden with raised beds, a pergola seating area, and native plants that support local pollinators. He held up his phone, turning it to show the colorful rendering. This sustainable approach is actually what many younger homebuyers are specifically looking for these days. He noticed a few nodding heads among the younger residents in the room. Encouraged, he continued, furthermore, as Patricia well knows, the current bylaws don't restrict this type of renovation, and the city has issued all the necessary permits. This proposed amendment cannot be applied retroactively to a project that's already underway. Patricia rose from her seat before he had even finished. Point of order, she called out sharply. Mr. Reynolds' project is currently under a stop work order from the city, which means it is not, in fact, underway. A temporary review that will be resolved tomorrow, Michael countered. Nevertheless, Patricia pressed, no further work has been approved, which means the amendment, if passed tonight, would absolutely apply. Tom cleared his throat uncomfortably. I believe Patricia is technically correct about the timing. If the amendment passes, and if the city lifts the stop work order, the new requirements would apply to the continuation of the project. Michael felt his face growing hot. The carefully orchestrated sequence of events suddenly became clear. Patricia had filed complaints with the city specifically to create a delay that would allow her to push through this amendment before he could complete the demolition. "This is a targeted attack on a single homeowner," he said, struggling to keep his voice level. "It sets a dangerous precedent for this community. Today it's my pool. Tomorrow it could be someone's decision to replace their lawn with native landscaping or install solar panels." A few concerned murmurs rippled through the crowd at this, particularly from the younger homeowners. Patricia's expression hardened. "This is not a personal attack, Michael. This is about protecting all of our investments." She turned to address the room at large. "And I resent the implication that I would oppose environmentally responsible choices like solar energy. This amendment is narrowly focused on features that significantly impact property values, like pools that cost thousands of dollars annually to maintain and are used maybe 2 months out of the year," Michael challenged. "Pools that many of us specifically chose this neighborhood for," countered an older man from the back of the room. The debate continued for nearly an hour, growing increasingly heated as neighbors took sides. Michael was surprised to find that while the more established residents largely supported Patricia's position, many of the newer homeowners seemed sympathetic to his right to modify his own property. Just as Tom was preparing to call for a vote on the amendment, the clubhouse door swung open. All heads turned to see a tall woman with curly hair and a travel backpack slung over one shoulder stride purposefully into the room. "Sorry I'm late," Layla announced, making her way to Michael's side. "My flight just landed. I hope I haven't missed the vote on this ridiculous amendment." Michael stared at her in surprise. "You're supposed to be at your conference until tomorrow." "I caught an earlier flight," she said, squeezing his hand. "Seemed like you could use some backup." She turned to address the gathering. "Hi everyone, I'm Layla Chen, landscape architect and Michael's partner. I designed the garden that would replace the pool, and I'd like to speak to both the aesthetic and property value considerations, if I may." Tom looked at Patricia, who was staring at Layla with barely concealed hostility. After a moment of uncomfortable silence, he nodded. "I suppose we can hear one more perspective before voting." As Layla moved confidently to the front of the room, Michael caught Patricia's eye. The look she gave him went beyond neighborhood disagreement or even property value concerns. There was a look of personal betrayal, and in that moment, Michael knew with certainty that Layla's theory had been correct. Layla's presentation transformed the energy in the room. Unlike Patricia's fear-based slideshow about plummeting property values, Layla offered a vision of beauty and sustainability. She pulled up professional renderings on her tablet, which Tom connected to the projector, showing the planned transformation in stunning detail. A xeriscaped garden with native flowering plants, a stone pathway winding between raised vegetable beds, and a pergola covered in climbing vines that would provide natural shade for outdoor gatherings. "This design actually increases usable outdoor living space," Layla explained, her confidence and expertise evident as she moved through her impromptu presentation. "Unlike a pool, which can only be enjoyed during warm weather and requires constant maintenance, this garden will be functional year-round and becomes more valuable as the plantings mature." She clicked to a slide showing similar conversions in other upscale neighborhoods. These are before and after property valuations from comparable communities in the region. As you can see, professionally designed garden conversions either maintain or increase property values in all cases. She paused, making eye contact with several homeowners. "The market is changing. Younger buyers are specifically looking for sustainable features and lower maintenance outdoor spaces. They want gardens, not pools." Michael watched Patricia's face throughout Layla's presentation. Her initial expression of contempt gradually shifted to something more complex, a mixture of anger, embarrassment, and what looked surprisingly like hurt. She kept her eyes fixed on her binder, scribbling notes furiously, only occasionally glancing up to shoot daggers at Layla. When Layla concluded, several younger homeowners applauded. Even some of the older residents looked thoughtful, perhaps reassessing their initial opposition. "Thank you, Ms. Chen," Tom said, clearly impressed despite himself. "That was quite informative." He adjusted his glasses. "I believe we're ready to vote on the proposed amendment. As a reminder, this would require homeowner approval for removal of premium amenities such as pools." Before he could call for a show of hands, Patricia abruptly stood up. "I'd like to propose a friendly modification to the amendment," she announced, her voice tight. "Given the information we just heard, perhaps we should narrow the scope to require approval only for conversions that do not include an approved landscape design by a certified professional." Michael recognized the tactical retreat. Patricia had realized she might lose the vote entirely and was now trying to salvage something from her amendment while appearing reasonable. Tom looked uncertain. "That's a substantial change to consider at this late hour. Perhaps we should table this and—" "I don't think we should be voting on any version of this amendment," interrupted Martina, the retired civil engineer who had supported Michael earlier. She stood up, commanding attention with her authoritative presence. "I've served on 3 different HOA boards before moving here, and I can tell you this sets a dangerous precedent to overreach. Our bylaws already cover external aesthetics. We don't need to micromanage each other's private property decisions beyond what's already established." A chorus of agreement rose from several corners of the room. Tom looked increasingly uncomfortable as the meeting threatened to slip from his control. "Let's put it to a vote," he finally said. "All in favor of Patricia's original amendment requiring HOA approval for removal of premium amenities, please raise your hands." Michael held his breath as he counted. 8 hands went up, all belonging to the older, more established residents. All opposed. 12 hands rose, including Michael's, Layla's, Martina's, and most of the younger homeowners. "The amendment fails," Tom announced, unable to hide his relief at having the contentious issue resolved. "Now, unless there's other business." "This is outrageous," Patricia suddenly exclaimed, slapping her binder shut with a loud crack that made several people jump. "You're all being short-sighted and foolish. That pool has been a neighborhood landmark for 15 years. Michael awoke early the next morning to the sound of his doorbell ringing with insistent urgency. He groaned, rolling over to check the time. 6:17 a.m. Beside him, Layla stirred but didn't wake. After last night's drama, they had fallen into bed exhausted, the emotional toll of the confrontation with Patricia heavier than either had anticipated. The doorbell chimed again, followed by sharp, rapid knocking. Michael pulled on a t-shirt and sweatpants and stumbled downstairs, mentally preparing for another round with Patricia. Instead, he opened the door to find Craig Dawson, the city inspector, standing on his porch with an uncomfortable expression. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, nodding in greeting. "Sorry about the early hour, but I thought you'd want to know right away. I've completed my review of your project and everything is in order. The stop work order has been lifted." Michael blinked in surprise. "That's great news, but couldn't this have waited until normal business hours?" Dawson glanced over his shoulder toward Patricia's house. "Normally, yes, but I've received 17 voice messages and 32 emails from Ms. Winters since yesterday afternoon. When I arrived at the office early to process some paperwork, there she was waiting in the parking lot." He lowered his voice. "Look, I've been doing this job for 12 years. I know a harassment campaign when I see one, and I don't appreciate having my professional judgment questioned hourly." "I'm sorry about that," Michael said sincerely. "Not your fault." Dawson handed him an official-looking document. "This is your clearance to resume work. I've already emailed a copy to your contractor." He paused. "One more thing. There's been a formal complaint filed against Ms. Winters for misuse of emergency services. The police surgeon from last night contacted me for corroboration of her claims about structural damage." Michael winced. "Is she in actual trouble?" "Probably just a fine and a warning this time," Dawson replied. "But it's on record now." He turned to leave and stopped. "Good luck with your garden, Mr. Reynolds. For what it's worth, I think it's a beautiful design." As Dawson drove away, Michael noticed movement in Patricia's front window, the curtain falling back into place as she retreated from view. He sighed, wondering if she had been watching all night, waiting for the inspector's arrival. Back inside, he found Layla in the kitchen brewing coffee. "Good news," he told her, waving the clearance document. "We can restart the demolition today." "I heard," she said, sliding a mug toward him. "I called the crew while you were at the door. They can be here at 8. She studied his face. "You look troubled. Having second thoughts?" "Not about the pool," he assured her. "Just wondering how bad this is going to get with Patricia. The inspector said she's being cited for misusing emergency services." Layla winced. "That might push her further over the edge, or maybe it'll be the wake-up call she needs." "I'm not optimistic," Michael admitted. By 8 o'clock, the demolition crew had returned and work resumed with a grinding roar of equipment. Michael and Layla sat on the front porch, working remotely on their laptops, both reluctant to leave the house unattended given recent events. At 10:30, a sleek black Tesla pulled into Patricia's driveway. A tall man in an expensive suit emerged, briefcase in hand, and walked purposefully to her front door. From their vantage point, Michael and Layla watched Patricia greet him effusively before ushering him inside. "Lawyer?" Layla guessed. "Probably," Michael agreed grimly. "Should I call Alex?" "Let's wait and see what happens." They didn't have to wait long. Less than an hour later, Patricia and the suit-clad man emerged from her house and marched directly across the street toward them. Michael and Layla stood as they approached, bracing for confrontation. "Mr. Reynolds," the man began, extending his hand. "I'm James Westfield, Ms. Winters' attorney. I was hoping we might have a word." Michael shook his hand cautiously. "What can I do for you, Mr. Westfield?" "My client has instructed me to inform you that she intends to file a civil suit regarding the damage to her property resulting from your pool demolition." "What damage?" Michael asked incredulously. "There is no damage to her property." Westfield smiled thinly. "Ms. Winters has photographic evidence of fine cracks appearing in her foundation and garden walls, which coincide precisely with the beginning of your demolition work. Layla stepped forward. That's impossible. The vibration from the equipment used isn't sufficient to cause structural damage to adjacent properties, especially with a buffer zone between the worksite and her property line. And you are? Westfield asked, raising an eyebrow. Layla Chen, landscape architect and licensed contractor. The demolition is being conducted according to all applicable codes and best practices. Well, Ms. Chen, while I appreciate your professional opinion, we have documentation that suggests otherwise. He turned back to Michael. My client is prepared to drop all claims in exchange for immediate cessation of the demolition and restoration of the pool to its original condition. Michael stared at him in disbelief. You're joking. I'd assure you, Mr. Reynolds, this is not a joking matter. The estimated repair costs to Ms. Winter's property exceeds $70,000. Patricia, who had remained uncharacteristically silent, now wore a smug expression that made Michael's blood boil. Mr. Westfield, he said carefully, I suggest you take a closer look at those photographs and their timestamps. The city inspector has already determined there is no safety issue here, and the police have documented Ms. Winter's pattern of harassment regarding this project. Westfield's confident expression faltered slightly. Harassment is a strong word, Mr. Reynolds. Calling 911 with false claims about imminent structural collapse seems to fit the definition, Layla pointed out. Before Westfield could respond, a new vehicle pulled into the cul-de-sac. A white SUV with Maple County Building Department emblazoned on its side. A woman in her 50s with short gray hair and an official-looking clipboard emerged and approached their growing congregation.